Welcome back to the shop, everybody. So today I am working on the skeleton portion of the trailer walls. Now, first thing we've got to do is line them up, hopefully all four corners, so that I can screw them together, so that I can basically cut once and have them both done. Now, I'm hoping I'll be able to get all four corners. If not, I'm going to have to deal with 3 corners, and I'll figure that out, which corner I'm going to make sure is not right. Once that happens, if it happens. Hopefully it doesn't. The reason why I say that is because there's a possibility that one of these glue ups on one of these corners compared to the other one is not quite even. So that means that I would definitely have to have at least one corner off, right? So we'll see what happens with that. Once I've got that lined up, I'm going to take the template, put it on top of here. I'm going to offset it a little bit so that I can at least kind of see where I can screw these 2 pieces together at, because I need to do that so that I can basically cut once and cut them both. Then once I got those 2 screwed together, I'm going to screw the template to the top, trace things out, and then I can begin cutting. And I've already ran into an issue. So I was removing the wax paper from underneath, where I had glued up, and this happened. That shouldn't be like that. However, I'm thinking that I'm going to leave it because it is still connected, and I'll just have to be really careful with this side. And I think that's the side that was already really cracked and stuff anyway, so I can't say that I'm really surprised. However, I'm not sure how I would fix it without digging into more plywood, and I just really don't want to do that because money. And so I'm thinking that once I get this glued up between the other 1/4-inch pieces of plywood, it should be perfectly fine. It does give some structure to it, but by the time that everything else is attached to it, it should be okay. So I'm thinking I'm just going to go along with what my plan was. Alright, so I have everything screwed together and marked out. The next thing is to get rid of this radius right here. And how I'm going to do that is with the scroll saw and then a router and a bit to really flush it out, using the template to make sure that it is nice and flush with that. I actually ended up having to go to the store for a different blade for the jigsaw because the one that I had just wasn't long enough, which definitely was a good idea. I tried it a couple times with the blade that I had, and it just would not have been safe and would not have been a good job. Then what I was able to do is take my big router, my plunge router, which I was thinking about using my little one, but it just made more sense for safety's sake to use the big one. And I started to go towards the bottom of the trailer, but soon found out that if I actually pulled it towards the other direction, that the blade and the machine liked it a lot more. And while I was doing that, evidently I had the blade just set a little bit too short, so I went ahead and lifted that up a little bit so that it would get just a little bit of wood that was still there. And I also trimmed off just a hair of the front of it because evidently I wasn't even with the template there. That's not going to be a big deal. A hair here and there on the front and back will actually probably be a good thing. So now I am going to take the template off, and I got to mark in where all of the shelves and drawers and all that stuff are. All right, now as I was going through my measurements on here, I was double checking everything just to make sure that everything was right. And one thing that clicked in my head was that I am doing a thicker floor than what he has in the book here. So that means that I was going with the wrong number for the floor right here. I was doing it with 1 1/4. The problem with that is I'm going with 1 3/4 flooring for the very bottom, and then a 1/2 inch, which is 3/4 piece of wood with insulation, and then a 1/4 inch piece for the top of the floor. So that means my numbers would have been about, that much off. Which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it could have ended up being a big deal once I got the mattress and everything in. Now, it's not that big of a deal, luckily, because all I have to do is raise the door by about that much. Now, that's not going to be too hard because I have the template. So, all I got to do is go around on the door frame, mark out that much more around it on the upside, and then I can just put the template down, mark it out, and put squiggly lines around the existing door area. So I'm glad that I caught that now, because that could have been a big mistake in the future. Now hopefully I'm right on this, because otherwise I'm going to end up having too much of a wall and not enough of a floor, and it could end up being an issue. All right, now as you can see, I have marked out the new bottom of the door as well as the new top, and I put a scratch line through the wrong mark so that I know that that's not the one to cut, and that that's the right one to cut, and that one's right to cut. Now what I have to do is I need to cut off this section of the floor as well as this section of the front all the way around and all the way to the back over here. Now I know that doesn't make much sense why I would go through all this just to cut that off. Well, because this here is a piece that gets sandwiched in between two of the thinner pieces of plywood. So this here ends up sitting on the floor, and the roof system actually ends up sitting right onto here. So you end up with a piece of plywood for the inner wall, and then you end up with your joists for the wall, right? That makes up the ceiling, and then you have another piece of plywood on the outside. So hopefully that all makes sense. All right, so now I definitely have to make a straight edge for the circular saw so that I can cut off this bottom piece here. All right, so I've got the new straight jig made, and I think I'm gonna end up having to move it quite a few times, and I'm just hoping that I'll be able to actually get this all the way straight, or straight-ish, down the line, because it really is important that it's straight, but I don't have a 10-foot straight edge for it, and I don't have the attachments for the bottom of the saw that go in here and here to be able to make it go straight on its own. So unfortunately I don't have that jig, so I'm gonna have to use this wood thing here that I made up, and I guess I'm just hoping and praying that it works. So cross your fingers with me. Oh yeah, I cut myself on the plywood. On a second thought of using this jig and stuff, it's got to be perfect. Otherwise, it could screw up things down the line that I don't realize. And I think the best thing is going to be is to take it very, very slow. But I think if I hook up the router and I take multiple passes to cut through them both, I think that's going to be my best option. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the router for this and make it so that basically the very edge of the router bit will be the very edge of the line here, and I should be able to put these rods on it and the stopper so that it'll just follow that nicely. That's the plan anyway. I think that it's going to be the safest and most accurate way for me to do this, because I don't have the proper jig or setup for that saw. And basically what's happening right now is I'm not getting all the way through both of them, because as you can see there, I'm trying to go through about 2 inches of material with a skill saw, and it's just not happening. So I think the safest thing and smartest thing for me to do right now is to set up the wen. And so that's what I'm going to do, and that's how I'm going to do it. It's probably not the right way. If you guys can tell me how I could have set up the proper saw to do this, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. I want to know. All right, so I did break a bit. Unfortunately, it's the large one, and I had it set so that it was going about yay deep, and unfortunately that may have just been too much for it. However, I don't know if I have the bit to blame, because the screws down under here that hold this on, you can see one right there, and there's another one right over here. Both of those were like extremely loose. So I'm gonna be keeping a really close eye on that. Other than that, I think that it went all right. It did take me several passes. And as you can see, like the rest of this here is fairly good. Right here is where the first one broke at. And that's as far as I got into there with it. You can actually see that it is much rougher than the second blade was. So I'm thinking there was an issue there before I ever got started that I didn't realize. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the router once again for the edge on the front, all the way going all the way to the back. And I'm pretty positive that I have those numbers correct. Sorry for the train. It's always interrupting. And after 3 passes, I made it through the 2.5 inches of plywood, and I am fairly happy with this. It went okay. There are a few spots with a little bit of waviness that goes out. So what I may end up doing here, like let me show you back here. Right here, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's definitely a little bit of waviness there that wasn't there on the first pass. So I may take the sander to that place and a couple of other little places, like right here, that can be fixed. That for some reason it just didn't get straight right there. Other than that, I think at this side went pretty good. I didn't break any bits, so that's a positive. Unfortunately, it's getting kind of dark. It's not as bright in here, and I've got to pay attention to lines to cut. And I could probably keep going tonight, but honestly, there's no real rush to, because as soon as I get these cut out, I'm going to have to hurry up and wait, because unfortunately our weather is looking like it's supposed to drop significantly this coming week. So I'm just going to make this into a one-parter for you guys, and I'm going to go to sleep real quick and I'll be right back. And it's the next day, everybody. So I am all rested and I am ready to get this done with. And on today's agenda is to remove all of the gaps for the insulation, as well as cutting the slots for the shelves and the bulkhead for the galley. First thing on the list is I need to make a jig for the router to be able to cut out all of these smaller places here, because it needs to be about 3/4 of an inch wide, and I don't want to try to hand do that. So I'm gonna build a jig. It actually shows in the book how to build one, so I'm gonna try to emulate that as close as I can. And here we go. Here is the jig. Basically, I've taken a couple of 4-inch pieces of 1/2 inch plywood, kind of screwed them all together here. I took a 3/4 inch piece of scrap plywood. I put cards on either side just so then it'd be a little bit thicker than 3/4 of an inch. Then what I did is I cut out 1/2 inch blocks as stoppers, 3/4 inch wide, or just as wide as the actual plywood is anyway. And now you can see here, this is the area that I need to cut out. And I have the WIN router here set up. So I'll be able to plunge down in there, and the guide here should run right on that 1/2 inch. I have it set for depth and everything, so I guess it's just going to be me basically doing that and moving it from place to place. Well, that was a little stressful, but I got those slots done. As you guys can see here, I've got both of the shelves for the front done. I've also got the galley wall, as well as the front of the cabinet done as well. Now, I have to be honest with you guys, these back ones aren't straight. They're about a 1/16 off, maybe a little bit more. And what I mean by that is that the bottom is a little closer to the end than the top is. So it's not a huge deal, and I doubt that anybody will ever notice unless if they're like taking measurements for it. But definitely something that I need to get some different tools to be able to really get perfectly accurate. But I'm happy with it. It's close enough for me. I don't need anything too particularly perfect. As long as it works and it looks good in the end, which it should, that's what matters to me. And like I mentioned, I did do the front here. I was going to do the cross brace as well. But honestly, I figure that I can get that with pocket screws and really shouldn't need that much strength to it anyway, because there's not going to be much on there, but there is going to be a TV on the front of it, which is why I'm bracing that into the walls just to give it a little bit more rigidity there. And now that I've got that done, which was the hard part, I can go back to cutting with the skill saw and cutting out all of the insulation areas here, and of course all of there. I'll probably do these ones first just because they're already, you know, no bench underneath them. And then I'm going to have to scoot it back a little bit more to get these. And then these ones up here, I'll probably just pull that forward. And with that, the skeletal system of the trailer is complete. But there are a few things I want to talk to you guys about. As I mentioned, this isn't completely straight, and for some reason I must have lifted up the router or something, and I just now noticed these little gaps. That shouldn't be an issue because there should be molding or something there, and the cabinets for the back galley will be right here anyway, so you won't see any of that. My cabinet spaces here all made out, so I could insulate those, insulate these two big panels here. If I would have thought about it, I probably should have left a little bit more wood right here. That way, if I wanted to put a little shoe shelf or something at the end of that, I could do that. But it's not going to be that big of a deal. I can figure out someplace else to put my shoes. Then we've got the front. Of course, we went ahead and cut out both of the shelf areas and insulation areas as well. And guys, that alone took off quite a bit of weight off of these wings here. I feel much more comfortable, even though that these still are wobbly. I'm still much more comfortable with them the way that they are. And then of course we've got the great big hole for the door. Now, as you probably noticed at the end of me cutting out the door, I actually put a big board here and a board here and screwed them to the plywood that I was cutting out. And the reason why is because I didn't want all this weight on, you know, this much bit of plywood when I was cutting it out. Now, did it help? I don't know, because the bottom piece still fell out when I was about like yay far from cutting it. So it wasn't too bad of a thing, but as you can see, I mean, it cut just about all the way. You can see right here where it actually snapped. So that's not too bad. So did I end up cutting them out perfect? No. Does it matter? No, because nobody's ever gonna see it unless they tear the thing apart. And so, yeah, as you can see, I didn't square them off. They are rounded in many places here. I ended up lifting this up here halfway through the cut because I realized that I wasn't at 2 inches anymore since I made that adjustment for the floor. So I went ahead and did that all the way across for both of these as well. I lifted that up 2 inches as well. And I also marked each one of these. I don't know if you can see, but there's a 1 there, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on down the line. And the reason why is because I'm going to use these corresponding marked cutouts for cutting the insulation. So therefore, it didn't really need to be perfectly square because I'm not going to be measuring them to put them in. I'm just going to use those as a template to cut out the insulation, and it should go fairly easily and fairly quickly. I'm glad that I was able to get this done today because it means that the next step is I can either take these someplace or I can figure out how I'm going to glue them up here properly. Yeah, that's right, guys. We're already going to be putting on the interior wall that will actually be showing on the next video. Well, probably the next video. I may end up doing a video of cutting out the insulation. It's supposed to be rather cold here until about the middle of next week. That's not this coming next week. That's the week after. So, not sure if I'm going to be able to work on the trailer much. However, I will be working on it as much as I can.